She pays taxes for two, for herself and for her late husband. She is the mayor. She is the librarian. She is the only voter who votes every single year for herself. Welcome to Monowi, Nebraska, a town with a population of exactly one person. But this is only the beginning. Today, we journey beyond the boundaries of civilization into 10 American settlements where isolation is not an emotion, but a postal code. From Alaska, where an entire town is hidden inside a single concrete building, to the Texas desert, where the dead are buried directly behind the pub. There are no neighbors here, no cellular connection, and no road back. These are 10 places that maps prefer to forget. Let us begin. Number 10. Terlingua, Texas, a sun-scorched crossroads where abandoned mining carts are left to rust. Among these crumbling stone walls, a population of 193 people officially resides today. This location is not merely a tourist decoration, but rather a consciously chosen edge of geography. Here, modern hermits settled directly within the silent ruins of a dead city, stretching canvas tarps over collapsed roofs and strictly conserving their scarce water. Their stubborn presence among the heavily corroded metal establishes the true scale of that absolute loneliness, which we will explore further. The last working storefront counter glows with a comforting warmth directly opposite the abandoned houses, whose peeling paint flakes away into the dry earth. Today, silence masks the true nature of Terlingua. This landscape once vibrated with the hum of industry. It was not a makeshift camp, but a strictly organized machine for extracting cinnabar, blending geology, a dry climate, and corporate appetites. Hundreds descended into deep shafts daily, leaving a surface network of red-hot smelting furnaces and hasty shops. Life was built on the absolute limit, contrasting human warmth against the coldness of heavy labor. Today, only slag heaps remain from that industrial boom. The combination of depleted ore veins and falling market prices quickly halted the mechanisms of Terlingua. The settlement emptied rapidly the moment corporate payouts ceased. Thousands of workers departed, leaving the cooled furnaces behind to decay. It was this total economic collapse that cleared the landscape for those rare, stubborn individuals who consciously choose absolute isolation today. Now, the ventilation shafts are choked with compacted sand, and the contradictory schedule of the only store hangs on the facade of the former office. The boundary between the departed and those who remain is completely erased at the old 19th century cemetery. This site is not preserved as an untouchable memorial, but utilized as a functional territory. Once a year, the famous Chili Festival fills the emptiness, and tourist tents are pitched directly among the nameless burial mounds. For outsiders, this serves as a colorful backdrop, but for the local loners, such proximity has become the daily norm. Human warmth is maintained here literally on top of layers of historical loss. This anticipates the severe isolation we will encounter next, where ash from festive braziers is replaced by dead gray dust. Number 9. Hanksville, Utah, an outpost that never should have appeared in this location. Beneath the scorching dome of the sky rises the jagged monolith of Factory Butte, completely surrounded by barren land. This is not a Martian set designed for filming, but a physical radiator of solid stone, where not a single root can take hold for miles around. Yet 175 people daily measure their lives by the strict conservation of moisture, voluntarily accepting absolute visual isolation. The climatic threshold dictates every movement. From the last residential structures to the very base of the cliffs, there stretches only a baked, cracked crust. In the exact locations where the midday heat haze trembles today, The first colonists stubbornly mapped out the rigid grid of a classic agricultural oasis. Completely ignoring basic hydrology, they attempted to impose fruit orchards and irrigation canals upon a profoundly hostile landscape. It was an exhausting battle against aggressive evaporation and deeply alkaline soil, the unforgiving physical filter that explains why only a few individuals managed to survive here today. The water vanished into the scorching bedrock far faster than it could ever nourish the roots, leaving behind a thick salt residue at the bottom of geometrically straight yet entirely dead trenches. The chemical composition of this soil absolutely eliminates any form of profitable agriculture. The desert did not merely win, it completely sterilized the entire space. Deep cracks in the parched ground have baked beneath the radiator of the sky, fixing a permanent geography of deprivation, entirely devoid of local infrastructure. To purchase basic groceries, the few remaining residents must cross 80 miles of scorching asphalt to reach the nearest supermarket. This distance is not measured in hours of travel, but rather in liters of gasoline and the volume of plastic water canisters. In the haze above the red clay stands a white two-story cylinder, the Mars Desert Research Station, an active site simulating extraterrestrial colonies. Modules were placed here because the landscape has crossed a climatic threshold, mimicking the geology of a dead planet. In this sector, the absolute isolation familiar to locals becomes a strict scientific protocol. Heavy airlocks seal the habitat, not against cosmic vacuum, but against abrasive earthly sand, marking the edge of the habitable world. A boundary that in our next city shrinks to a single building. Number 8. Whittier, Alaska, a city entirely compressed into a single concrete box. The 14-story Begich Towers barracks stands isolated on a narrow strip of land, squeezed between a sheer cliff and the icy water of the fjord. There are no familiar streets here. Almost all 263 residents sleep, study, and pray under one roof, while storm winds capable of knocking a person off their feet rage outside. This is not an architectural experiment, but the harsh mechanics of survival, where the terrain precludes horizontal development. Every square meter of this vertical island is heated for those who traded open spaces for profound isolation. Initially, this vertical fortress was never intended for civilian residents. During the Cold War, military engineers searched for an inaccessible deep-water port sheltered behind sheer mountain cliffs and dense cloud cover to construct a secret garrison. Thick concrete barriers and enclosed internal corridors were specifically designed to ensure the survival of stationed soldiers under the direct threat of frostbite or an external strike. When strategic priorities shifted, the armed forces departed, yet the emptied outpost did not disappear. Its redundant army infrastructure became the ideal survival mechanism for people who intentionally cut themselves off from the rest of the continent. Hundreds of meters of dimly lit corridors today end at securely locked sections. When the military officially closed the garrison, the colossal concrete monolith was left in the care of civilians, transforming into a purely utilitarian survival machine. Heavy hermetic doors and exposed pipes serve as the only buffer against the freezing cold. What was originally constructed as a military shield has become a refuge for stubborn inhabitants occupying the former barracks, all while violent storms rage beyond the solid walls, and the single path through the mountain rocks is regularly blocked by winter avalanches. Every night, heavy mechanisms seal the entrance to the Anton Anderson Tunnel. 4 kilometers of narrow corridor, carved through solid rock, form the only thread connecting this isolated facility to the mainland. When the display timer expires, or thick fog descends on the mountain pass, the gates shut completely, and the entire population of the monolith is physically locked between glaciers and the dark waters of the bay. This regulated isolation exposes their paradoxical stubbornness. They voluntarily remain where geography rigidly dictates the conditions of freedom,
preferring the cold concrete of a military past, or, as we will see next, the icy permafrost of log cabins.
Number 7. Chicken, Alaska. A remote point on the map where daily life remains firmly frozen in the permafrost. There is not a single meter of asphalt here, only deeply rutted dirt roads and wooden facades surviving untouched since the era of the first prospectors. When the temperature drops, the settlement plunges into deep isolation, existing entirely without central electricity or running water. During the winter, exactly 12 people remain in these houses. This is not merely a museum decoration, but a conscious rejection of the rest of the world. The residents voluntarily choose an absolute disconnection from the grid, depending exclusively upon the steady hum of autonomous generators and stockpiles of chopped wood. Today, the profound silence masks the sheer scale of what happened here a century ago, when this gorge was a bustling industrial camp during the gold rush. Hundreds of people dug relentlessly into the icy rock in search of quick wealth, but their traces remain completely frozen in time. Heavy winches and rusty buckets lie untouched among the dense coniferous undergrowth. This stark transition from mass greed to the conscious solitude of a few individuals demonstrates exactly how absolute detachment from the world takes root. Along the stream, wooden washing flumes still stretch into the distance, their dried boards preserving the exact engineered angle. The gold eventually ran out, but the punishing cold remained an ever-present force. The mass exodus was provoked not only by empty rock, but also by the absolutely ruthless climate. Brutal winter temperatures, plunging below -50 degrees, methodically cleared the entire valley. The surrounding ground froze solid to the state of concrete, leaving the abandoned equipment to lie perfectly still exactly where it had stopped. Those very few individuals who refused to depart stayed behind not for the sake of illusory profit, but out of pure, unyielding stubbornness. This represents a highly conscious choice: to continuously heat a stove inside log cabins lacking running water while the soil beneath their foundations freezes. A rusty road sign at the entrance speaks not of the greatness of the northern conquerors, but rather of their banal orthographic helplessness. The harsh prospectors originally wanted to name the camp after the local partridge, ptarmigan, but no one could spell this word correctly, and they simply burned chicken onto the wooden boards. This absurd compromise exposes the very essence of the local isolation. Here, there is absolutely no need to conform to the strict standards of the outside world. The sheer stubbornness of a handful of people forever turned a simple mistake into official geographical coordinates, which are slowly fading on a bent pole beside an empty highway, as if preparing us for the even more deserted roads of Nevada. Number 6. Baker, Nevada, a tiny enclave located just outside Great Basin National Park. Here, beneath one of the darkest skies found anywhere on the continent, reside a total of just 26 people. It is a living but slowly thinning settlement where 60 miles of absolute emptiness stretch out endlessly before you reach the nearest gas station. The cracked paint on the scattered houses and the faded sign of the single remaining store silently resist the harsh desert wind. The encroaching sagebrush does not destroy this isolated island of human stubbornness overnight. Instead, it reclaims the territory slowly and patiently, while at night, a profound darkness completely swallows the surrounding valley, leaving behind nothing but a few dim, glowing windows. Once, this crossroads was not the edge of the world. It served as a vital oasis for those crossing the brutal Great Basin Desert. Wooden facades of old trading posts still bear faded signs that once beckoned exhausted drivers. When new highways redrew the map, the settlement lost its commercial purpose, and roots slowly shattered the asphalt of abandoned lots. Transit needs vanished, yet the remaining people simply locked their extra doors, standing behind the last counter while sand methodically buries the empty rooms of nearby motels. Relocating the federal highway tens of miles north stripped the settlement of almost all traffic. It was not a sudden collapse, rather a slow suffocation by logistics and harsh terrain. Nature is in no hurry. Heavy dust fills cracks at dried-up gas stations, and sagebrush roots consume the gravel shoulders. Here, the paradox of survival gains weight. The remaining few did not flee isolation. They used the broken asphalt as a physical buffer, preserving their meager existence behind peeling doors. As darkness falls, the isolation of Baker changes its scale. The absence of municipal streetlights transforms this exhausted valley into one of the darkest zones in the country. When the sun disappears behind the ridge, a dense mass of unfiltered cosmos hangs over the scattered rooftops. Here, the stubbornness of the residents collides with absolute emptiness, and their readiness to endure this vertical loneliness beneath the stars echoes the relentless silence that consumes aging settlements at the very edge of the northern forests. Number 5. Solana, Alaska, is not so much a conventional settlement as it is a scattered collection of sheer stubbornness hidden deep within the taiga. The aging wooden cabins are slowly being consumed by the surrounding forest. Creeping roots undermine the log structures, while the damp soil steadily reclaims the open space around old woodpiles. Out of the 64 individuals still remaining here, the median age currently stands at 73. There are absolutely no shop windows or familiar modern infrastructure in sight, only a single dirt road disappearing into the dense coniferous expanse. Ultimately, this isolated place exists not due to any geographical logic, but exclusively through a steadily depleting reserve of. Half a century ago, this dense forest was not advancing upon the scattered houses. Instead, it was being methodically cleared by commercial loggers. Heavy machinery relentlessly drove through wide clearings, chainsaws buzzed from the break of dawn, and the community constructed solid infrastructure to support ambitious long-term plans. Today, the only remnants of that intense industrial rhythm are rusty chains and abandoned sawmills, whose deteriorating wooden frames are slowly dissolving into the damp moss. The younger generation eventually departed following the permanent closure of the logging operations, leaving behind nothing but empty classrooms. The current recluses do not simply hide away in the vast taiga. They consciously grow old upon the crumbling ruins. The quiet courtyards of Solana are being consumed not only by the taiga, but also by a slow demographic erosion. The steady outflow of the younger generation to larger cities has become completely irreversible. In the exact places where children's bicycles once lay abandoned, dense forest undergrowth now rises, and the damp earth slowly digests the forgotten plastic. The few elderly residents remaining here serve as a living thermometer for this vanishing settlement. Their quiet stubbornness merely emphasizes a profound truth that we are destined to understand closer to the end of our route. Absolute loneliness truly begins when the promise of a future leaves the village forever, and the empty schoolyard is finally swallowed by damp moss. Survival in this remote place is strictly measured by accumulated reserves of meat. The last remaining residents maintain their isolation through continuous hunting, butchering carcasses inside frozen sheds with sagging roofs. This is the relentless daily work of staging hands on the border of the advancing taiga, whose roots are already breaking apart the foundations of empty neighboring lots. When this final generation departs and the fire within the remaining stoves turns cold, the encroaching forest will simply take its next natural step forward. However, if the erasure here occurs entirely by the slow forces of nature, our next destination will demonstrate exactly how a settlement can be erased by the simple stroke of an official's pen. Number 4. McDermitt. This settlement should not exist in this form. No amusing geographical curiosity, but a zone of slow administrative erasure. The invisible Nevada-Oregon border cuts through cracked asphalt, severing postal codes and taxes. On the southern Nevada side, only 12 people remain. Their addresses seem deleted from main registries, trapped in a vacuum where state responsibility ends. Yet this stubborn minority refuses to vanish, living in homes whose coordinates are torn in two by a paper line. Previously, this invisible line did not sever the town, but stitched it into the unified industrial mechanism of a wealthy mining hub. Formal borders dissolved beneath the weight of extracted ore. The local office continuously stamped shipping waybills, merging resources from both jurisdictions into one common stream. The harsh climate retreated before the heavy roar of transport trucks, creating the vital infrastructure that made extreme isolation tolerable. However, when production fell, the bureaucratic machine withdrew its guarantees, leaving behind only rusting scales and annulled charters. The official death arrived entirely on paper. After the final sealing of the mines, both states simultaneously crossed McDermitt off their infrastructure funding registries. It was a cold administrative calculation, annulling established trade routes and redirecting budgets to other counties. This resulting vacuum filtered out the temporary workers, leaving behind only those whose stubbornness proved harsher than the climate. Authorities permanently erased these coordinates from supply maps, abandoning the chain-locked shafts and dust-covered folders of closed municipal accounts. The state borderline runs directly through the faded hall of the only surviving tavern. On one side of the cracked bar counter, Nevada tax rates apply. On the other side, Oregon laws prevail, although not a single inspector has appeared here in years. This is a true jurisdictional vacuum, a place where a handful of stubborn residents have learned to exploit the absolute indifference of the system. The road sign at the entrance has rusted into complete unreadability, and postal codes have ceased to function, transforming the remaining houses into administrative blind spots, precursors to even more absurd mirages of local government. Number 3. Mentone, Texas. It is an administrative hub woven entirely from dust and sheer stubbornness. At a scorched intersection stands a solitary brick courthouse with peeling paint on its doors, serving as the official heart of the least populated county in the entire state. There is neither a central water supply nor a gas station, and the rare passing automobiles raise thick plumes of dry sand that settle on faded signs. The wide parking lot in front of the entrance preserves the scale of past ambitions, but today the entire scope of local government rests on a mere 7 or 10 permanent residents, and the nearest store is a full 70 miles away down a relentlessly scorching highway. If today Mentone seems like a monument to absolute isolation, in the 1920s, this land vibrated under the heavy machinery of an oil rush. Hundreds of worker camps bit into the unforgiving dry soil, and the distant horizon bristled with drilling rigs. This rapid influx of people demanded strict civic order. Local judges held sessions, jail cells operated, and a complex bureaucracy churned. This brief union of industry and geography laid the foundation for a striking paradox. A massive administrative machine was constructed for thousands, yet it was ultimately inherited by only the most stubborn few individuals. Today, the scale of that historic boom is measured solely by the weight of dusty land registries on steel shelves. When massive oil profits evaporated, workers left faster than abandoned steel could rust, and the county's economic viability collapsed alongside well pressure. Heavy pump jacks froze across the dry prairie, slowly coated in oxidation. Yet this is not a classic ghost town, but a lingering bureaucratic oversight. The administrative center's charter was simply never revoked. Now, a few individuals reside among empty offices, where hundreds of square miles of dead iron are overseen by one active sheriff and an official seal. The courthouse is still cleaned according to a strict schedule. This remains an active jurisdiction where a monumental facade rises absurdly above the vast emptiness, and the quiet corridors echo with the footsteps of a clerk who serves a territory populated by only 7 residents. It is precisely here that the profound paradox of voluntary exile takes on a truly frightening form. The bureaucratic machine continues to turn its gears, meticulously governing the absolute silence. In the entirely empty courtroom, 12 chairs for a jury are carefully arranged, a group that is physically impossible to assemble from all the remaining residents of the entire county, an absurdity that pales only before the extreme physical trap.
Number 2. Supai, Arizona, a settlement that physically should not even exist on a map. The descent here requires traversing 8 miles along sheer cliffs, where every single step through the crumbling gorge threatens a dangerous fall. There is not a single automobile road to be found here, leaving only a profound vertical isolation. At the very bottom of this stone well, about 450 Havasupai people continue to live in what remains the most inaccessible permanent settlement in the country. This is not some ethnographic mirage, but rather the absolute stubbornness of a people voluntarily locked inside a topographical trap, a remote place where all cargo is lowered exclusively on the backs of mules.
While the rest of the continent was being covered by a dense network of asphalt, the people of the Blue Water maintained their traditional way of life for centuries at the very bottom of this stone fault. Their ancestors made a conscious decision to embrace this vertical isolation, where sheer cliffs and the constant threat of rockfalls served as a physical shield against any outside invasion. This calculated rejection of the comfortable plains is a mechanism of stubborn survival in defiance of the harsh terrain, a mechanism that acquires its absolute form right here. Even today, the boundary of their ancient land is still rigidly defined by the line of a deadly precipice, an edge that simply does not forgive a single wrong step.
The descent begins exactly where the paved highway abruptly ends. A winding trail snakes along the steep canyon wall, leading 2,000 feet down into the depths. This is not a case of infrastructure degradation, but rather an unforgiving terrain that physically rejected heavy construction machinery, completely preventing the installation of modern utility networks. There are no motor vehicles down here, only scorching dust and caravans of mules navigating a narrow stone ledge where every single step is accompanied by the constant risk of falling into the empty void. The electrical power lines and the painted road markings terminate precisely at the very edge of the abyss.
There are no ambulances here, and basic supply lines are dictated by archaic methods. Mail and food must be brought down by caravans. The life of the community balances between the muscular endurance of animals and aerodynamics. In the event of severe injury, there is only the tense wait for a rescue helicopter. This fragile logistics network demonstrates how easily the boundary between stubborn seclusion and a deadly trap is erased. When the canyon catches gale force winds, the rotor blades halt, and a person remains at the bottom of the gorge, locked beneath a wall of solid stone, in an isolation that only one individual in America has managed to surpass.
Number 1. Monowi, Nebraska, the ultimate endpoint of demographic compression. Amidst the endless flat fields, a dimly lit tavern with peeling paint continues to operate, while a tiny library stands crowded with thousands of fading book spines. For several decades, the school bell has simply not rung here, leaving behind nothing but empty, grass-overgrown foundations in the wake of the departed youth. This represents the ultimate form of human stubbornness. For many long years, the entire population of this municipality has consisted of exactly one solitary person, Elsie Eiler. She single-handedly signs the necessary permits for the local bar and transfers taxes directly into the only remaining town treasury.
What today is compressed into a single illuminated tavern was, back in the 1930s, a pulsating agricultural hub that supported 150 residents. Heavy railway trains were loaded with harvested grain, while along the main street stood an active post office, a grocery store, and 3 tall grain elevators. This settlement functioned as a rigid logistical mechanism of the Great Plains, remaining entirely dependent on train schedules and seasonal crop yields. However, when the widespread consolidation of agribusiness fundamentally changed the economy of the region, the demographic pulse began to inevitably slow down. The steel rails were completely dismantled, leaving behind nothing but an empty gravel embankment and the boarded-up windows of abandoned local offices. Today, harsh prairie grass sprouts through the collapsed roofs of the neighboring houses. This decline was dictated by a slow economic erosion, as transport isolation had been pulling people out of the region for decades. The local population melted away generation after generation, leaving behind only peeling paint on abandoned facades, until by the early 2000s, only one married couple remained here. In 2004, Elsie's husband passed away, and from that day onward, the official demographics of an entire town shrank to a single line in the voter registry. On the scratched bar counter rest municipal forms, all filled out in exactly the same handwriting. Out of our entire list, this particular paper surrealism seems the most inexplicable. Elsie annually held official mayoral elections, dropping the only voting ballot for herself directly into the ballot box. This is not a mere tourist legend, but a strict administrative procedure. In order to preserve the legal status of the town, she paid municipal taxes to herself, financed the operation of the streetlights, and issued herself a liquor license. The official stamp would descend onto the paper with a dull thud, legally maintaining an entire settlement through the relentless efforts of just one human being, the absolute pinnacle of American loneliness.